Look, I mean, even me saying this, 21-year-old female to have over 10 bodies is a remarkable reality that we live in now. No man is omniscient. I'd like to believe as a man, when I choose to settle down with a partner, I can predict her future behavior with a high degree of accuracy. Let's say I'm with somebody for 2 to 3 years. That 2 to 3 year experience should allow you the means to see whether or not a lifetime with her would be one that you would entertain. For 2 years, she's been generally pleasant. And even when she's not generally pleasant, because we're not always pleasant all the time, she is tolerable in those moments. If you're a competent man, you will think this way naturally. When you're making a very big decision, especially something like marriage, you will, of course, take these things into the equation. Hell, even long-term relationships, you should approach with the same degree of rationalization, because you don't want to waste your time, your financial assets, your resources on somebody that is fundamentally going to make your life worse than it was when you were single, naturally. Few things have the potential to impact your quality of life as profoundly as the selection of a life partner. There is a gravity to that decision that is unlike anything else. So with that firmly grounded, what then can we use as a reliable metric to predict future behavior and minimize psychopathic behavior, irrational behavior, especially if you want family? And I know marriage rates aren't exactly up at the moment. So now, do you know how one accurately determines future human behavior? Do you know the number one metric is if you're going to have that kind of omniscience past human behavior? Now, with this in mind, let me introduce you to our post from Throw R8 K108. I'm probably going to stop saying these names because they are all ridiculous. My boyfriend isn't okay with me being promiscuous in the past. I need to give myself a moment to pause here. I mean, who would, really? Is me ruminating on this post making this problem worse? Like, why is this a question? I'm digressing. Let's read. I'm a 21-year-old female dating my boyfriend, 23 male. I understand some people don't like their partner's body count, and it can be a deal breaker. Some people, in some cases. But my boyfriend asked me what my body count was and told me not to lie to him, and I was completely honest with him. My body count is more than 10, but less than 20. So not completely honest then, were we? I'm not going to be completely specific. And he got upset right away and stated, since I'm a woman, I should hold myself to a higher standard. Big G. He has said that women who are promiscuous deserve to be treated like thoughts, and got offended about that. And I got offended about that. Natural. He thought that I'm overreacting for getting offended at him telling me that. We ended up making up and moving on, and he doesn't mistreat me often, but he has showed signs that he doesn't trust me as much since that whole conversation. Like he constantly needs to see my location now. Now, I'm not going to naively concede that this male is devoid of all responsibility in this particular context. But first, let's start with the issue at hand and what I prefaced. For some reason, it's becoming an increasingly more common female reflex to believe that body count has no bearing on the outcomes of your relationship, that it's not going to constitute some of the longevity of it and also the quality of the relationship that you have with your partner. I will add at this stage, no promiscuous woman or man, by the way, would ever concede that this would have an effect on their future relationship prospects, but it does. It definitely does. Why? Because it goes back to what I said about predicting relationship success. Look, if you're a man looking to have a wife. The likelihood that you're going to find a virgin in Western culture is becoming increasingly less likely, sadly. And if you happen across somebody who is a virgin, hold on tight. They are like unicorns nowadays. But what would be the natural successor, the next best thing, as it were, if you can't ascertain somebody who hasn't had sex before? The natural successor for future long-term relationship success would be a history of few long-term relationships. The fewer the better. This is what I talked about beforehand by saying you're practicing for marriage. Marriage success would be more likely if you married someone whose previous, let's say they only had 2 previous relationships, but they were both long-term relationships. Let's say over a year. It's amazing that that constitutes long-term relationships nowadays. Comparatively, if you were considering to marry somebody who previously had 10 relationships, but they were short-term relationships of under a year. One history overtly leans in towards monogamy, and the other overtly leans in towards promiscuity. Look, I mean, even me saying this, 21-year-old female to have over 10 bodies is a remarkable reality that we live in now. I wish I could say this is uncommon, but perhaps that's wishful thinking. I will say at this point that just because this has gone viral and this is a viral post, that this doesn't necessarily mean that this is the norm. Doesn't necessarily mean that the average 21-year-old woman in Western culture now has an average of 15 bodies. But again, take that with a handful of salt. What I will say on this point is that after she has disclosed that body count to this particular individual, further fraternization on his behalf is completely his responsibility. You cannot plead your ignorance to the fact after you have got that information. It is a very weak-willed and overtly feminine thing to do, to hold on to those negative emotions and to participate in your own suffering. Either accept the reality of the situation and let go of the negative emotions, or tell her straight up that you can't deal with it and let her go. I would typically favor the latter option. I'm sure many of you gentlemen would agree with me here. There is the pair bonding argument, of course, but I like to keep things simple. History tells you a lot about the future. The more reference points you have for relationship and partners, the more difficult it is for you to consider settling down with one of them. There's going to be so much nuance and disparities into the positives and negatives of each individual partner you have, and where are those opportunities for comparison are going to be the opportunities for discontentment. I wonder what the comments are saying here. He doesn't mistreat you often is the phrase I thought many of the women seemingly in this comment section would be highlighting. That is a pretty low standard to base a relationship on. His disrespect and judgmentalism of women in general is repulsive. He sounds like a nice guy. Just a quick sidebar here. Women are emotional creatures. They are not rational. They are not logical. They are not going to see things from your point of view. They are not going to understand that history predicts future. Most of the comments here are just highlighting on this. Again, I will say you should never tolerate any kind of abuse in the relationship, irrespective of your sex and irrespective of the sex of your partner. I wonder if there's actually anything interesting that's being said here. There was an interesting deleted comment here. What is higher standard people? Mildly older woman here. What standard is it that the person cannot have a sexually active life? The girl has had a sexually active life, and it is her right to look for pleasure. If he had a higher body count, he would be experienced. Leave this boy ASAP. By the way, guys, I have mentioned many times, I do not believe in this narrative that a high value man has sex with as many women as possible. I actually think that comparatively, it has the same kind of effects on his potential to pair bond in the future. Sure, everybody has a right to look for pleasure. Everybody has a freedom to do that, but just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something. Just because you have an opportunity to do something doesn't mean that you're free from the consequences of doing that thing. That has always been inherent in life. Then really, get a fucking dildo then. It amazes me that people have no reverence or value on sex at all nowadays. It's a product, it's a service, and it's adding to the neurosis. It certainly is. And we're going to find that out in a couple of, not a couple of years, we're already seeing it now, but 10, 20 years, believe me, it's going to be rife. And the antidote is being a little bit more conservative, well, a lot more conservative, being more chaste, being more respectful. Self-respect. Self-respect. Gentlemen, these are not theories. These are cold, hard facts. Speak soon.